This here is a new Parkhurst boot that in my accent is called Allegany. But my American friends have schooled me. I think I know how to pronounce it now, but did I size it right? G'day, welcome back to Bootlosophy, and my name is Tech. Welcome to Wajak Noongar Buja here in Perth in Western Australia. Let's get this right. This is not the Allegany, it's the Allegany. Did I do that right? Points out of 10 down below. But there's another more serious issue here than how you pronounce this name. It's a new last brought out by Parkhurst. So does it fit the same as their 602M and 618 offerings? I'll leave a link to Parkhurst's website below so you can go and read what Andrew Savisco, the owner, says about the different fits in the lasts. But before I get into that, let's have some fun. I'm going to flash a few West Australian place names here, and you tell me how you'd pronounce them. So how would you pronounce that? Most people who are not from WA, even Eastern Staters, would say Mandurah. It's actually Mandurah. Well, that was easy. Now let's try this. If you know how to spell gnash your teeth, that should give you a clue. But where do you place the emphasis? It's Nangara. Okay, one more. How would you say that? How many of you thought it was Tudye? Well, it's 2J. 2J. See how hard it is for us all to speak a common language. Anyway, let's go straight into the sizing for this boot. If you watch my video on the different lasts that Parkhurst have used, from the 18 to the 602 to the 602M and then to the 618, you get an idea of how their combination last has evolved. However, this 645 last is a different beast. It's not an evolution, but rather a rebirth. Just for those of you who don't know, a last is that foot-shaped mold that the maker builds the boot around, giving it the specific shape. You know by now that the 602 last was named after Andrew's grandfather's landing ship tank that he served on in World War II. The 618 was named as a combination of the 602 and the 18 last, and now he's come up with the 645, which uses the 6 series and then adds 45 as a nod towards the end of the war. It is inspired, note inspired, not copying, by the famous Munson last and incorporates a rounder, more voluminous toe box, theoretically wider ball, and again, theoretically narrow arch and heel. I'll tell you why I say theoretically on my own feet in a minute. When I ordered, Andrew emailed me to expand on his fitting advice. He said that the 645 is closer to Brannock measurement. Because the toe is so round, people have thought they need to size down, but he suggested I go with my Brannock size. He did also say, however, that if my width and volume was average, I should probably be okay with the same size as my 602M and 618 boots. My feet are not that far off average, so I went with my regular size 8 when my Brannock is 8.5. The truth? They fit, but I wish I'd gone with the Brannock 8.5. I find that there is a hot spot on the outside of my right foot where the width of my feet edge into a size E. I also don't mind the narrow heel and waist, which I find is not as narrow as the 618, more in line with the 602M. So if you have Parkhurst boots that are a perfect fit, I would seriously consider going upper half. My next Allegany would be an 8.5. So now let's talk about the aesthetics of this new 645 last and the service boot / work boot shape it builds in a boot. In style, it has moved away from the sleek late 2010s idea of a service boot and more into a work boot design or a more truthful World War II service boot shape. While still technically a 6-inch boot, the Munson style last makes the front end much more boisterous and tough looking. This is not a boot for business casual and much more a rough and tough jeans and denim boot. The real toe cap is big and chunky across a round Munson last like toe, and looking from the side, it has a muted and less aggressive version of the Viberg 310 lasted service boot's toe spring. Using the Parkhurst proprietary commando lugged sole, and in this very pull-up worthy leather, it is definitely more work boot in aesthetic than a service boot, and the likening of it to a Viberg 310 lasted service boot, it's not that far off. I have in the past, in talking about Parkhurst's 602 lasted boots, publicly said that if you didn't want to pay Viberg prices, you could get a Viberg-like and almost Viberg quality service boot from Parkhurst. If you are a regular on my channel, you know a lot about Parkhurst. But not everybody watching is a long-term Bootlossophy viewer. So for those who are, forgive me, I'll take a little while to talk a little bit about the history of Parkhurst. And if you really are interested, go and see my interview with the owner, Andrew Savisco. Now, Parkhurst was founded by Andrew, financial analyst turned bootmaker, in 2018. He is based in upstate New York and started by partnering with a factory in Batavia, New York, sourcing as many of his components from American manufacturers, or, despite the extra cost if he had to import, then he bought them from local resellers of components, for example, day-night soles. From 2018 to 2020, Parkhurst was establishing itself as a small, direct-to-consumer, small batch manufacturer. That meant that Andrew only bought enough materials that he could afford to make a small batch of drops from time to time. And often, after the leathers were used up, that particular makeup would no longer be available, or would not be available again, at least for some time. Then in 2020, COVID struck and shut down the world. Andrew found that his suppliers slowly went out of business, one by one, and even the New York factory eventually shut down for good. It was his personality, I think, that saved him, because he built up contacts that liked him, and they introduced him to a factory in Spain. With the connection to that factory in Spain, Andrew found a close network of suppliers for the materials he needed surrounding the factory just nearby. And from there, he was also introduced to a factory in Portugal that specializes in stitch-down construction. Today, Parkhurst is growing, but it is still a relatively small batch manufacturer, and it continues to serve direct-to-customer, dropping makeups about twice a year. The Allegany is made in Spain. Andrew tells me that he will likely move production to Portugal, as it does stitch down, but also welted as well. At any rate, this has the feel of the stitch down boots made on the 618 last in Portugal, only this is a Goodyear welted boot. So let's go through the construction. It sits on a Parkhurst proprietary rubber commando lugged sole, with actually quite deep lugs, but built inboard so that the stitch misses the lugs and also allows for a more discreet look from the sides. It's constructed as a 360-degree Goodyear Storm welt. The welt is this thin strip of leather that's stitched to the edge of the boot, stitching together both the insole and the tucked-in uppers from the inside, and then stitched again on the outside of the welt, through the welt, into the midsole, and through that into the rubber outsole. You should be able to see that the welt has a lip pushed up against the leather. This is called a storm welt and increases water resistance. Goodyear welted boots are water resistant anyway because of that double stitch not allowing water to penetrate the stitching holes on the outside. But this storm welt is supposed to lessen the chance of moisture seeping in through the sides. I mentioned the midsole. The midsole is the part of the sole that sits between the outsole and the innards of the sole inside the boot. This one is in veg tan leather, and it covers the cork filling and the steel shank that sits between the heel and the ball of the foot, and which stiffens the arch and gives the whole boot its rigidity. Inside the boot, the insole is also veg tan leather, and this sandwich of leather, cork and leather gives a long-term comfort inside the boot as it gradually sinks in and molds to the shape of your feet. Just going back outside, the heels are made of stacks of veg tan leather that are nailed into the boot and topped by a glued and nailed commando top lift. Back inside the boot, the vamp is lined with leather, but the shaft is unlined. The uppers leather is a pull-up heavy tumbled leather, and this color is called mahogany. This one is a full vegetable tannage, and the hides were extensively tumbled in drums with oil during the tanning process to produce a more rugged appearance. You know, this is such a pretty leather due to the tumbling with a heavy pull-up effect, and due to the veg tan, is supple and easier to break in than I would have expected. It is 2 to 2.5 millimeters thick. You can get the Allegany in plain toe, but I chose the cap toe. This is a real cap toe. That is, it's made first as a plain toe boot, and then an extra piece of leather is stitched on as the toe cap. So there's actually 2 layers in there, plus then the lining layer. The rest of the pattern is dead simple. You get the vamp, the tongue is sewn onto it, 2 quarter pieces, and a single piece backstay. The heel counter inside is veg tan, and it feels supportive but not stiff. The stitching consistency, both in the welt and in stitching the pieces together, is very clean and consistent. The toe cap is stitched on using a 2+1 pattern, and the double stitch there is very close to each other and parallel. The quarters are quadruple stitched in a 2+2 pattern. Even the backstay is double stitched. Very closely, very consistent. The tongue is semi-gusseted, and the hardware comprises of 5 brass eyelets, 3 brass speed hooks, all solid enough and all properly backed so that they don't scratch either the tongue or your fingers. The lace facings and the collar are sewn into a flat seam. All in all, it's really beautifully put together. As for Leathercare, Parkhurst's website suggests a care routine similar to Chrome Excel, which makes it easy. Brush it to keep it clean. If not after every wear, then at least once a week if you wear it daily, less if you don't. You can clean it with a damp cloth, and if it's really soiled, you can easily apply saddle soap as well. As for conditioning, the Parkhurst website suggests Smith's Leather Balm or Bic 4. Now, personally, I'd use Venetian Shoe Cream. If you want to re-oil it as the tumbled hot stuff oil gradually dries out, you can use mink oil, but be careful of mink oil blends, which may contain petroleum-based products. Personally, I think it might be better to use a pure neat's foot oil if that's the case, and neat's foot oil doesn't darken as much as mink oil. Finally, let's look at the value. The cost, as at the time of review, is $418 US. You could argue that a Red Wing Iron Ranger looks similar and probably has a similar use case scenario. Iron Rangers sell for $350 US, but I think they're not as well finished as these are, to be frank. You could argue loosely that the Jim Green Numzan from South Africa, for example, is also a round toe, cap toe work boot that's very similar. Although those do have a different aesthetic, and those sell for $280 US. Their 719 boots sell for over $250 US. Those comparisons sound like these Allegany boots are too expensive, but in terms of value, you get better finishing, and I would argue better materials. None of those I've mentioned so far, even the Iron Rangers, look and feel as carefully finished as these are. So comes the Viberg 310 Last service boots. They're over $1,000 US. Now, don't get me wrong, hear me correctly now. I think the finishing and construction of the Vibergs are phenomenal and probably phenomenally unmatched. But the Parkhurst finishing is a good second, and for a good second, you pay over $500 US less, which seems to be good value versus the price comparison. But you take a look. I've put a link to both websites down below. Make up your own mind. And there you have it. In summary, yes, I do like this last and this boot, but it's probably a lot less my style in everyday wear than the 618 or 602M Last service boots from Parkhurst. And definitely my next 645 Last Parkhurst will be in my true size. Bear that one in mind. I hope you liked this review. If you did, you know what to do. Click on like, and please, if you're not already, consider being a subscriber. Next week, more boot reviews. And until then, take care of yourself and see you soon.